Greetings, everybody. I'm Larry Williams, the Director of CARMA, the Consortium for the Advancement of Research Methods and Analysis in the Rawls College of Business at Texas Tech University. It is October the 24th, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to another CARMA Quick Chat. You may know that Quick Chat is where we take the opportunity to connect and get to know those who are going to be contributing to CARMA. And today we're very excited to be chatting with Joep Cornelissen from Erasmus University. And he will be giving a webcast lecture in a couple of weeks, November the 15th, on theoretical triangulation. And that webcast lecture will be at 2 p.m. London time and 9 a.m. Eastern time for those of us in the States. And if you don't know, the webcast lectures are made available to our institutional members of CARMA's program. If you don't know about CARMA, we do webcast lectures, panels, and short courses. You can find all that information on our homepage, karmattu.com. And so with that in mind, let's go ahead and get it going. Joep, the first question I had for you is, how did you become interested in becoming an academic, and where did your interest in theory emerge?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thanks, Larry, for having me. Yeah, so I finished my PhD. I completed my PhD in 2000, so that's almost 25 years ago now. And I initially so I come out of a working family, and my dad wanted me to become a professional of some kind, but definitely he didn't have being an academic in mind. And I got the opportunity a bit indirectly to do a PhD at a polytechnic in the UK, and yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed being in academia. I still think it's the best job in the world. It's sometimes becoming a little bit harder given the pressures on higher education and the sector that we're in, but yeah, I still enjoy the working with ideas, working with students, yeah, meeting people like yourself and others. So that's really a fantastic thing to be of our field. I think the interest in theory came, I think like many things, it just came about. So when I became an editor for Journal of Management Studies, I realized that a lot of the language that we use when we communicate with authors and with reviewers is a very coded language. So we talk about construct clarity, we talk about framing, we talk about propositions, the strength of a theoretical contribution, as if these things are very clear to everyone, and as if we all have the same common agreement as to what, say, a good proposition is. But I also realized quite soon in that job that we don't actually have a lot of, or at least at that time, so this is in the 2006, 2007, I felt we don't have a lot of good knowledge, nor is there very good training often as part of PhD programs just on theory alongside methods or alongside substantive content. So I think, yeah, it's something that I felt is important, so that I tried my best as an editor to help authors and to give feedback, given my abilities, my limited abilities, obviously, to think about these theoretical matters. So it came from there that I felt, we need to do a better job helping authors struggle with these points. So don't just say, it needs to be a stronger contribution, but then try and articulate, demystify and articulate how they could do that. And then I also, from that, got an interest in just trying to figure that out and help the field more broadly. So a lot of my writings in around theory have that component. So it's all about trying to figure out what is it that we do, or what is a particular concept, like forming propositions or construct clarity, or nowadays I've got an interest in the fact that we always refer to mechanisms, and we seem to do that along qualitative, quantitative, conceptual work all across. So then I find it interesting to figure out, how is it being used? Why do we use it in a particular way? And can I help people try and use it more effectively for their own work? So it always has that element that became interested in that, and then I've just stayed with me, and then I just felt this is maybe where I can make a little bit of a difference.
Yeah. Well, no, you're clearly making a difference. So, as a methods person, I'm particularly interested in the testing of theories and that space where the theory bump us up against the method. And
Mm,
so, in reading us back to look at some of your work to get ready for our chat, I came across this term methodological plurality as something that you have written about. And
mm.
so, why is that, and why is that concept important for management research?
Oh, it's a good question. I think in a very simple sense, it means that we as a field stay open and benefit from the multiple ways in which we research and inquire into the phenomena that we care about, and that we want to develop knowledge on for our stakeholders. So that's qualitative, quantitative, but also different types of epistemology. So it's not just post-positivist, realist, explanatory traditions, but it's also interpretive, and it's also critical, more emancipatory traditions. And it's my strong belief, I suppose, that if you have as a field, if you really make effective use of all these different ways of knowing, all these different ways of inquiring, rather than focusing on the one, or maybe even seeing the one as preferred over the other. So, that's a sort of classic thing that nowadays you don't hear that a lot. But when I started in the profession, obviously there was still a little bit of a pecking order between quantitative and qualitative, and the one being seen as more established or maybe more real science, and then qualitative as more exploratory or more supportive in nature. I think a lot of that has changed, but it's probably fair to say that for the field in general, but also a lot of sub-disciplines, we whether we don't have a full true state of pluralism, where different voices and different methods and different ways of knowing a phenomenon really sit alongside each other. So if I think of fields like organizational behavior or strategy, that's I would say that's still those are still fields where the balance is a bit off compared to, say, a field like entrepreneurship, where you really have a lot of these different methodologies, but also different epistemologies, and very good and deep and sound discussions on the phenomena that they care about. Obviously, it's a value judgment and orientation from my perspective. But I do believe, as I said, that it really it creates better knowledge, better understanding, and it also offsets the limits and the biases that you would have from any of these particular methodologies or particular styles of reasoning in and of itself.
Yeah. Well, it's sure, from my view, there's a better balance. It may not be what we would hope for in the long run. But, I was involved with the methods division, research methods division, as it was formed. And in those early days, there was a lot of tension and not a lot of shared understanding. And it seems like it's a good direction that it's going in, and I think that's what makes the possibility of good mixed methods research
Mm,
so
mm,
powerful.
mm, mm,
But I'll just give a quick shout for those that are interested in sort of a more of a historical perspective on qualitative research. Mike Pratt did a webcast last week that kind of is qualitative research looking to the past and looking towards the future. That's really was very good. So, on the qualitative side of things, you have an interest in the concept of templates. And for some of our quantitative viewers, they may not fully appreciate templates and the role that they place, and seemingly some, I don't know whether controversy is too strong of a word, but it seems like the qualitative researchers are struggling a little bit with their role. So can you
Mhm.
help us share by sharing your views, since that's something that
Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah, so a template is, as far as I'm concerned, so I'm sure other people have other definitions, but it's the use of particular protocols in qualitative research, so like the Eisenhardt case study method or the Goya inductive grounded theory building approach. These are protocols that are actually very helpful for not just for research design, but also for how to work with your data. So in the Goya protocol case, to systematically abstract out from raw primary data, first order data, to gradually more conceptual, higher level categories, and then also think about how they might be at a more aggregate level related. And so these protocols are very helpful. I think the debate in the field is more. So it's the classic issue that a lot of methodologists talk about, that as soon as something turns from a methodology, a very considered way, reflexive way of using something, a protocol, into just applying a particular technique, and where the technique or the application of it really becomes a substitute for this more considered, thought through experience, then there is a risk that it becomes a very technical, technocratic exercise that leads people in this case to just fit their data into these coding structures that, for instance, the Goya protocol suggests. And that may actually not be how a lot of the people behind these protocols were initially thinking
right?
about how they should be used. So it's also a reflection of how over time that shift from methodology. So thinking about what could be, in case of the Goya protocol, what could be a good, from a particular vantage point, epistemological perspective, a good inductive, interpretive theory building approach, and then using it as they have done in that more thought through and reflexive manner. But then it evolves into something which is a bit more like a technique that people apply. And I suppose the other side, that where the struggle lies or where the debate is that if a template becomes very institutionalized, then it may also come at the expense, or may become the preferred choice in a way. So it may become what reviewers, what readers expect. So if they see a grounded theory study, then they would expect, a lot of them would expect a Goya type protocol to be used. And when that strong institutionalization happens, the risk is that it might crowd out other types of approaches. So other types of interpretive approaches, other types of, let's say, discourse analysis, other qualitative methods that could equally be used for the data at hand. So I think it's those 2 points. So the more mindless technocratic use is a problem in the eyes of many, and then the other is that, yeah, as soon as it's institutionalized, it's very hard. If you're not using the protocol, it may be harder for you, if you're an author doing a discourse analysis, for instance, to get your work through. And yeah, there are fair debates to be had. I think they probably benefit everyone, including the protocols themselves and the use of these protocols. So I think it's a good thing.
Well, that's a great description. I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, it seems like kind of the risk, if I'm tracking it, the risk is that through an overly rigid use, they come to work against the very richness of
Yeah,
understanding the
yeah, yeah,
phenomena
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah,
qualitative researchers are really interested in.
yeah.
Well, you mentioned, and my first question had to do with theory. And of course, our field depends upon a training process where we train our students in theory and methods and analysis, and hope that they figure out a way to put it all in their blender and end up with good research. I've been teach more on the method side, so I can appreciate the challenge of that. But there must be their own challenges for those who really focus on training doctoral students in theory. And so my question is, so based on these experiences, when you start trying to help doctoral students understand what theory is and how we should use it in our research, are there some common misunderstandings that you see, things that the students, in spite of your best efforts, struggle with?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I've been teaching a class on theory for yeah maybe 20 years now, actually quite a long time. So I felt that there is an acute need for PhD students to. So initially it started more as a reading class, but now over the years I've really worked with editorials, worked with papers in our field, and we actually do have a lot of really good papers that are about the methodology of theorizing. So go back to a lot of editorials in AMR, Weick's Disciplined Imagination, but also Alverson and Sandberg on problematizing assumptions. There's a lot of really good papers that give you, in a sense, the how-to detail of how to theorize it, and at the very least be more reflexive of your own theorizing, but also give you very practical tools and steps that you can take to work to conceptualize in particular ways, to define your constructs. There are very good papers in org research methods on concept and construct development. So I think it's one thing that if we're thinking about the PhD training, that a lot of PhD students will, in a way, will help. They will help themselves if they really make use of all of the knowledge that we already have in terms of how to do this effectively, and really try and read through a lot of the editorials that are often very written up in a way that is very practical and very actionable. So I think that's the first thing I would say. Then the other thing, and that's also something that I try to do in my course. So obviously the default perspective on theory is a set of basically a relationship between a proposed relationship between two constructs, or if you're really going down to the empirical operational level, a hypothesis between two variables. That's a sort of baked in understanding that goes back to Dave Bretton's editorial in 1989 and Bacharach's piece that has been very influential also in 1989 in AMR. So I think, and maybe you can trace it further back. So some of the founding pieces in our field articulated that way of thinking about theory. So I think that still for a lot of people in our field, and also what PhD students are being socialized into, that's really the common denominator, that's the gist of theorizing. So it's some form of forming a propositional claim, maybe more abstract or more empirical, or both, depending on your studies, backed up by some covering theory that gives you the logic for the proposed relationship. That's one version, but it's not the only version. So obviously, if you go back in the social sciences, it's in our field a very dominant view, also not the only view. I mean, we have a very diverse and big community. So there's alternative versions of theory. So I already mentioned alternative epistemologies, and they each have their own alternative version of how to theorize, what counts as theory, what a theoretical contribution is. So that's also something that in my course, so even if let's say you're doing experimental work and you're not going to deviate too much from that default perspective, I think it's still helpful to know that there are these alternative ways of theorizing and these alternative ways of knowing out there, including in our field, and that you will be able to appreciate and value what each of these different perspectives bring. So I try to correct that a little bit, but I also at the same time appreciate that and try and make students more sensitized to the style of theorizing that they themselves use. So if it's propositional, that's fine. I'll try and work with that. If it's process theorizing, that's equally fine. If it's configurational, equally fine. If it's a post-structural or a post-colonial critical style of theorizing, that's equally fine, and I'll try and help them with that. I don't know if that fully answers your question, but yeah.
That was great. That was great. So I found it curious then, I don't know why, but to see that you've also have an interest in some of the new technology that's used in that exists and is being applied to our research. And I saw that you have a paper on large language models. So how does that fit in? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, wow. It's I really don't know where to start. It's such a big topic, and it's everywhere nowadays. So I think from my own perspective, so when I started in the field, I was initially interested in sort of linguistic analysis, applied linguistics and discourse analysis, and I was looking at things like metaphor and analogy in both language and thought, and at the time, which is not too long ago, so this was the early 2000s, people were really saying in the cognitive linguistics and the computer science community, there's no way that you can model the or approximate the connectionist architecture of the brain, and particularly the creative forms of thinking like analogy or metaphor or counterfactual reasoning or any of these things that you can't with sort of the computer code that they had and the architecture that they had at the time. They couldn't model that. And now with large language models, and that's, I suppose, what gets everyone so excited, is that you can approximate some of that. I think the jury is still out as to whether it will fully capture, um, fully the full spectrum of human creative thinking with all that that implies. So consciousness, emotion, the types of reasoning that we're able to engage in, including inductive, deductive, abductive reasoning. Not simple counterfactuals, but really expansive counterfactuals that really expand your horizons in thinking about a topic. I mean, that's where the jury is still out, and I think we're now at a time where obviously a lot of the protagonists, the people promoting AI and large language models, will say, okay, the leaderboards are telling you, scientists will soon be, a lot of the work that scientists do, including social scientists, will be automated in the future. And the leaderboards show that it can do causal reasoning, it can do causal identification, it can do counterfactual reasoning, it can do all these things. It can do a better literature review and a synthesis of past work than you can. So, and I'm really fascinated by these papers coming out now that talk about in silico. I don't know if you've heard that phrase, in silico social science. So it's the idea that a lot of what we now do is still in vivo. So it's still with, it still involves us as living human beings, setting up the research, doing the research, speaking even in a mediated manner with people as we ask them to fill in a questionnaire or be part of an experiment or whatever. In the future, so this is really the ones that are true believers. In the future, a large language model, all that can be computerized. So in silico means through computerized steps. So the large language model can review the literature for you. It can design the study. It can collect the data. It can analyze the data. It can do the write-up. So it would mean that in the future, all of us will, and our skill sets as we have them now, will no longer be needed because they can be automated and maybe even done better. At least that's the argument, by these tools, these technologies. Yeah, and that's where I find it fascinating, but I also, yeah, I mean, to me, that's a little bit of the hype speaking at the same time. So I think we really need to, and that's, if you read a lot of the good computer science pieces, so not necessarily the only the papers that are coming out of Microsoft or OpenAI, or research groups associated with them. But if you read around, you see a lot of computer scientists saying, okay, hold on a minute, let's see at what the technology can really do. So also in our case, we really need to think about, so we shouldn't just blindly adopt it and already make it part of our work packages, but we should, coming back to the pluralism question, so to what extent is prediction the same as explanation? To what extent can we truly rely on LLMs to, let's say, do a literature review for us? Realizing that the technology is stochastic in nature. So if you give it a prompt now, I give it the same prompt 2 minutes later, it may not return the same thing. So there may be a different literature review that it gives to you, a summary and a synthesis as it would give to me. So I think a lot of these things. So how reliable is it across prompts? Uh, what does it really do and propel forward, predict forward as a valuable output? When is it usable and useful, and when is it not? If we make it, also ask ourselves the broader question: if we make it an integral part of our work packages, will it privilege certain ways of knowing and certain types of research, where prediction, so big data sets, maybe more experimental settings, large archival data, will that be privileged at the expense of, say, qualitative research in the traditional way? So I think, yeah, I mean, you see, I mean, it's we're now in that hype phase, and it's obviously, so sorry that this is becoming a bit of a longer answer, but I find it fascinating that the hype is there. I I I I I think everyone sees the computational possibilities and what it can do. I think we should be really careful to think about, to not too quickly assume that it can automate and augment everything that we do. And we should be very mindful of what it will come at the expense of as well. And then I don't just mean the environmental and the social costs, which are enormous, and we don't speak about these things, but also the cost to our community. So if it would mean that, let's say, if certain things will be automated and that will mean that certain skills that researchers used to have, like reviewing a literature that I mentioned, or like doing the interviews yourself, as opposed to having a bot do them on behalf for you. Um, that's something we really need to think about, the erosion of certain skills in our community, and whether that's something. So even if we gain some efficiencies and some scale, what is it at the same time that we might lose for the same type of activity, and then still presuming that it is the same type of activity. Yeah.
Well, that's a, a great perspective that you just shared, and I'm thankful for the thoughtfulness that you put into the answering that specific question, because it's one that we all are struggling with, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
As I mentioned at the beginning, we're here in part to set you up for your webcast. So let us close by asking about your webcast. That's going to be in a few weeks, November 15th, on theoretical triangulation is the topic area. For those in the Eastern Hemisphere, that'll be 2 p.m. London time. For those of us in the West, that'll be 9 a.m. Eastern time. So can you give us a preview?
Yeah, although it's still in the works, so to speak,
Oh,
but obviously I'm going to talk about on what we've been talking about already right now, in terms of thinking about different styles of theorizing, the benefits and the drawbacks of each of them, and how for yourself, for a particular project, or for, let's say, a PhD thesis or a study that you're doing, uh, it's beneficial to be more mindful and reflexive of the style that you use. Also consider other styles. And this might sound quite abstract, but it would mean that, you really reflect, for instance, if you do a form of propositional reasoning or hypothesis testing, that you become more reflective on using that style. So am I using it properly? Can I use it better? What are the downsides of it? Can I cater or account for that? And that goes for all of these different styles that I will be explaining in the webinar. Um, so I'll be focusing on that. giving you a good grasp of what a theorizing style is, and then showing you, and that's what the triangulation refers to, the benefit of combining them either in a study or, and then we're talking more broadly, this may be more policy-wise for an entire field. So how an entire field benefits when you have multiple styles, so to speak, in operation, as opposed to staking everything on one particular style. And the critique from my side in particular is towards, you know, the hegemonic position that the propositional style has way beyond, you might say, its carrying capacity. And that means that a lot of the false positives that we have, and yeah, the questions that a lot of people are now asking about the credibility of our knowledge, the relevance of our knowledge, are we in crisis as a social science field, really also partly stem not just only from replication or methodological issues and methodological fixes, but it also stems from staking everything, putting all our eggs in that one little basket, and asking the propositional style, so testing singular propositions or testing singular hypotheses against an empty background. And then, yeah, assuming that providing we get significant results, that is a true reflection of the complexity of the social world that we're studying and that we care about. So I'm going to take that example. So it's not necessarily so I'm not against the propositional style, but I'm taking that example to show that if you weigh too much on one singular style, with the strengths that it has, but also the constraints and the validity challenges that come with it, then that's very dangerous predicament to be in. So for yourself, it pays to branch out and to combine different styles of theorizing, different ways of reasoning for your study, and equally the same goes for a field. So I'll give some examples, and then I'll take you through those 2 points.
Okay, well, we will very much look forward to that. Joep Cornelissen, Rotterdam University, Rotterdam School of Management, Erasmus University. It's been a treat. I've really enjoyed this opportunity to chat with you and very much look forward to your upcoming webcast. Thank you for taking time
Thanks
from
a
your
lot. Yeah.
share this with us.
Thank you.